This brief video clip just gives teachers an idea of what is expected from CAPS for your senior phase home language. Now, senior phase home language is allocated 5 hours per week. And in those 5 hours, there are 4 aspects that need to be covered: listening and speaking, reading and viewing, writing and presenting, and of course, language structures and conventions. In listening and speaking, learners look at both the listening process and the speaking process, as well as different kinds of listening, and then features and conventions of oral communication. Most importantly, the learners need to practice and they need to present. With reading and viewing, we look at different reading strategies, and of course this builds on your foundation phase and intermediate phase reading, interpretation of visual texts, vocabulary and language use, sentence structure and organization of texts, and then features of literary texts. Writing and presenting focuses on the writing process, and during this process, the language structures and conventions. The learners also look at features of text produced. Now, language structures and conventions are critical in producing and comprehending oral and written texts. So these should be taught in conjunction and in context with all the other skills. Now, the allocation of time in a 2-week cycle for listening and speaking is 10% or 1 hour. Reading and viewing, which of course consists of comprehension and literature, is 4 hours, which is 45% of the time. And then your writing and presenting, also 45% or 4 hours of the time. The key skills in English home language that we need to remember is that learners need to be able to answer problem-solving questions using critical and creative thinking. They also need to be able to solve real-life problems. So we need to include this in all our teaching and assessment. And then we need to teach and use activities that will encourage all of these skills. It's essential that we monitor on a daily basis so that we're actually able to assess and see where the learners are at, as it's too late at the end of the exam or in the June-July exam, because we want to see where they're going wrong so we can correct it before these exams. In terms of formal assessment, in grade 7, the learners complete an oral, 2 writing tasks, and a test. All 4 of these tasks make up the first term's marks. In term 2, the learners do their mid-year exam, but they do an oral and a test as well. So the oral and test is separate to the mid-year exam, and then they complete 2 papers, language and context, and writing. In term 3, the learners do an oral, once again 2 writing tasks, and a test. In term 4, of course, there's the end-of-year exams. So the learners do an oral, which is separate to the end-of-year exams, and this gets counted into their school-based assessment mark. And then you've got the end-of-year exam, which consists of 3 papers, paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3, which is the oral, the language and context and literature, and then the writing paper. At the end of the year, calculating the exam marks or the final term marks consist of school-based assessment, which is made up of term 1, term 2, and term 3 school-based assessment tasks, as well as the oral task from term 4. This makes up 40% of the final mark, and then of course you've got 60% coming from the exam mark. These 2 marks or percentages together make up your final 100%, and from there a code is calculated, and that gives you your results to say whether the learner progresses or is promoted to the next grade. In grade 8, very similar, except the actual tasks are different or slightly different. So again, the learners have to do an oral, 2 writing tasks, and a test, and you'll notice the writing tasks on a slightly different level here for the learners. In term 2, the learners have to do an oral and writing task again, and then their mid-year exams consist of 3 papers, paper 1, paper 2, and paper 3. So your oral, your language and context, and your writing. Term 3, same as term 1, except the actual tasks are slightly different. You've got your oral task, your writing, 2 writing, and a test. In term 4, again, the oral is separate and calculated into your school-based assessment mark for the year, and then you've got your 3 papers for your end-of-year exam mark. Once again, to calculate your end-of-year exam, or your end-of-year result, you've got term 1, term 2, and term 3 school-based assessment tasks, as well as your oral from term 4. That calculates to 40%, and then your term 4 mark, which comes from the exam, is calculated to 60%, and those two together make 100%. This gives you your mark and then your code for the end of the year. Grade 9, once again in term 1, oral, 2 writing tasks and a test. Term 2, the learners do a mid-year exam. So besides a mid-year exam, they've got an oral and a writing task. And now their mid-year exam consists of 4 papers. Paper 1, which is the oral. Paper 2, which is language and context. Paper 3, which is writing. And now literature. 10% of your exam mark is literature, which has now been introduced as paper 4. All of this together makes up your term 2 result. Term 3 is your oral, 2 writing tasks and a test. And then in term 4, your oral, which is separate again from your exam. And then the learners do, once again, 4 papers, paper 1, 2, 3, and 4, which makes up your end of year examination. In grade 9, term 1, term 2, and term 3, including the June exam, and your oral task from term 4 gets calculated together to give you 40%. Your end of year exam counts 60%, and together that gives you your progression or promotion mark. And finally, what should English home language teachers be aware of? Well, the first thing is, what makes the difference between home language and first additional language? And there's one key difference, and that is the level of skills that the learners develop. So we need to make sure that the learners are developing their skills at the correct level. What should they have developed in home language? Basic interpersonal communication skills and also cognitive academic skills. Remember, home language is the basis for all of their other subjects. So when they go on to FET, they need to be able to critically think, debate, express themselves, communicate in their home language. And we need to develop these skills in home language. And then most importantly, this level provides a learner with the ability to analyze on an abstract level for a better understanding of the world. Most importantly, make sure we teach home language with fun and practical ideas. This keeps the learners engaged and keeps them wanting to learn more and develop their skills.